Many things I love about my job, following on from John Bird, is not one of them. Because what I'm going to do is talk about some of the detailed evidence and some of the more mechanical stuff about poverty, not because I'm interested in farming the poor, but because I think people in poverty are our fellow citizens. And I'm entirely at one with John. We are wasting huge amounts of money and masses of talent the way we're doing it now. We can't continue the way we are. We cannot continue having big meetings like this to talk about persistent poverty as if it's inevitable. I'm going to argue it's neither inevitable or desirable, and it's certainly something that we as a society can deal with. I'm going to prove I can't make my technology work as well. Mark, in his introduction, said a little bit about Joseph Rowntree Foundation. I just want to describe briefly what we do, not because it colours everything I say, but because it does bring me back to this issue about the root causes of poverty, and I want to talk about that when I talk about persistent poverty. We describe our purpose as searching, demonstrating, in order to influence on behalf of people who live in poverty. And our three big work programs are about poverty, they're about place, and they're about the voice of the dispossessed. And for that reason, if that reason alone, I wanted to come and take part in this incredibly important discussion about what we do about persistence. Flash through those. We have a huge program of work about poverty, and I'm going to touch on various bits of this. I want to talk about attitudes to poverty. I'm not going to talk much about child poverty because Frank has done that so lucidly, but a number of these themes, all of which we publish huge amounts of material on, will colour what I want to say. But when I saw the invitation for today, I thought, isn't it interesting, the concept of persistent poverty? What do we mean by it? What is this issue of persistent poverty? And it seemed to me that there are several different definitions, and you'll all have your own in the room. There's the issue of poverty among individuals over time. The story of individuals who grow up and throughout their lives are in and out of poverty. That persistent drag on an individual's lives where they never break free. They never have the choices that people who have money find for themselves. But there's another sort of poverty as well when we're talking about persistence. There's poverty between generations. The description of what Frank so graphically said about the way in which poverty is transmitted through generations. There's persistent poverty within geographical areas, those parts of the UK which we all know lock in poverty, places where it's enormously difficult to find your way out. And finally, there's the poverty that you hear about in the Bible, the poor always being with us, the fact that we have for centuries talked about people in poverty, and yet this rich, powerful society that can do so much carries on accepting that as a problem. And that's the structure of what I want to talk about briefly. I want to talk about the persistence in individuals over time, because we know that 50% of us will experience poverty at some time or other. People are divorced, they lose their jobs, things go badly wrong for them. And most of those people snap back. For most of those people, it's a disruption. They've left university, many of them this year probably won't get a job, they will be poor. The people we're concerned about are people who for 3 out of 4 years have been below whatever poverty line you choose to use. They have not had enough money to get by. And there are lots of very interesting debates about where you set that line. And I really try at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation not to get too exercised about the detail of where poverty is, because all of us know. We know what it's like to not have enough. We know people who haven't got enough, and many of you will have worked with and for people who haven't got enough. The persistence of poverty in individuals over time is a sticky thing. It's hard to get out of. Of all the people who get a job and start to grapple their way out with such courage and such determination, only a third stick with it. A third of people who have been poor for more than 3 years, when they get a job, don't last. And that may be because the job doesn't last. It may be because the job was a poor job, one that gave them no progression, that didn't give them a chance to stay. It may be because they weren't ready to do that job, and they made a mess of it, and they didn't get a second chance. It may be because the accidents in poor people's lives, the accidents that have happened to all of us all the time, can be absolutely catastrophic for people with their fingernails on that first rung of a job. So persistence among individuals over time seems to me something we really ought to address. But the second thought is about persistence between generations. The television programme Shameless is only a drama. It is not how people live. The ONS reported recently that there are 20,000 families in the UK where nobody has worked in 2 generations. 20,000 is not a very large number. We can certainly deal with it. What we have got is precisely the sort of people that Frank was talking about, who start their lives poor, and by the age of 4, you can predict where they will be when they're 30. You can predict that gap will grow wider and wider. And the reason we have concerns about early intervention, welcome though it is, and important though the foundation stage is that the gap between children at 5 when they go to school is huge. The gap when they're 14 is even bigger. And it seems to us too much of a risk to say we will write off the current generation of children in school by focusing all attention on the under 5s, important though that is. We know that poor children are much more likely to raise more poor children. They will grow into poor adults, and their children will also be poor. All of that Frank has enumerated and described an extraordinarily powerful roadmap for it. Childhood poverty leads to poor parents who in turn produce poor children. And how we break that cycle seems to me to involve all of our ingenuity. Yes, by all means, a big focus in the foundation years. Yes, let's focus on that very powerfully. But let's remember that education and enterprise, as much as crime, is what gets people out of poverty. And the routes into education, enterprise, and therefore employment are tricky ones for any of us to navigate. If you haven't got parents who've done it before you, it's extraordinarily difficult. What we do know is that if at the age of 16 you are poor, by the time you're 30, you are very likely to be poor. If at the age of 16 you're doing all right and your parents are doing okay, 90% chance you will be fine as well. So that issue of how we transmit between generations seems to be one that's absolutely critical as we think about this. And the third area I wanted to just dwell on is the persistence within geographical areas. The last Labour government focused a huge amount of money on individuals. They focused a large amount of money as well on geographical areas. The real challenge is how we link those two together and how we make sure that there are parts of the country which are not just traps for people in poverty. We've talked about the dynamics of poverty in place, the fact that in some places the only way you can get on is to get out, which leaves isolated, desperate communities. We're interested in the way the labour market can be shaped to make sure that there are jobs with progression, with security for people within those particular overlooked and neglected geographical areas. Otherwise, anyone with any skills and any abilities comes to London. London can't manage that, but nor can the families left behind who will remain poor while their children leave home. And finally, I wanted to refer back to the founder of Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who counted people who were poor. He and his son, Seaburn, counted people who are poor. We do that every year. Every single year we publish a report looking not just at income poverty, but a whole range of indicators about quality of life. The picture is not a pretty one. It's one that should fill us all with huge shame. But I believe it's one that we have the tools to respond with. We know the importance of education. We know that the benefit system, as it's currently structured, traps people in poverty. We know that the sorts of jobs available in the modern labour market are not suitable for very many people and will not be able to deal with the risks in their lives. And we know enough about the life cycle to know that we need a system of support through employment, through education, and yes, I would say through some benefits as well, that allows people to deal with the risks, the vulnerabilities, the challenges we all face in a way that doesn't make it absolutely catastrophic for them and for their children. Thank you.